Hi, everyone, and welcome to TheFIX. I'm your host for TheFIX here on the TWIP network. You know, we spend a lot of time in this podcast talking about how to use Lightroom, how to use Photoshop, how to process your photos. Well, there's another really important ingredient that goes into making a great photograph, and that, of course, is creativity. Tonight, my special guest, Sean Kernan, is going to talk with us about how to become more creative as a photographer. We'll chat a bit about the subject, and then, and this is the very special part, Sean is going to share his screen and show us some specific exercises that you can try as a photographer to try and enhance your creativity and your approach to taking photographs. Sean Kernan is a very skilled photographer in his own right. He's published an amazing book of photographs called The Secret Books that I really urge you to take a look at. He also has recently written a book called Looking into the Light, which is all about creativity and what you can do to get better at being a creative photographer. So let's jump in and talk with Sean Kernan. Sean Kernan, thanks so much for joining me.
Happy to be here in Boulder with you.
Well, you're not actually in Boulder. You're somewhere else far away. The magic of the internet. So I know that you have written a terrific book, and I know that because you were so kind as to share that with me. And I've read, part of it, not all of it, and I am amazed by what I'm reading. You are giving me so many ideas. This book is called Looking into the Light, right?
Yes, it is.
What's it about?
It's my effort to put what I've learned in 35 years of workshops and done in workshops into some form that doesn't require flying to Maine or Santa Fe and getting together with 12 other people, although that's wonderful too. So I've just tried to see if I could get this stuff, I don't know what else to call it, this stuff, into some form that people could get it and work with it and play with it themselves. It's a strange thing. It has no shape, as you can see. You could start at any point and read it in any direction, and it would still work. So,
well, let me ask you this: what is it about? It's a book about creativity. Would that be fair?
It is a book about creativity, which I think is the most important part of photography. Nobody ever taught me how to. I never studied photography, and so I didn't know how to teach it. But when I did start teaching it, I felt that the real work began maybe before you touched the camera, while it was hanging at your side, when you were walking around. It's about the state that you were walking around in. And if you're walking around looking for a specific thing, then you see that, or if you don't see that, you go home. But if you walk around and see everything, then everything becomes the kind of photograph that I want to take, which is one that I can't think up sitting at home.
So you're suggesting then when you were walking around with your camera that you stop thinking about photography?
I stopped thinking about photography. I try to stop thinking about photography or how I'm going to do it, how I'm going to get it done, and just kind of get lost. If I can tell you this little illustration that I came up with, which is if a photographer walked into a meeting room in a hotel, he'd look around and say, where's the picture here? The president is speaking in an hour. Where can I get a good photograph? Where are the angles? The Secret Service man walks in. He looks around and he says, where could somebody get into this place? Where are the doors? Where are the exits? We have to seal them. But a 2-year-old would walk in and he would think nothing at all. He'd just take it all in, all the energy, all the excitement. So he's seeing a much broader picture. And what I want to do is get back to being that 2-year-old again.
Well, that's, I think, asking a lot of adults, isn't it?
It isn't. It's in a sense, all you have to do is kind of release. And it's so close to us. That's why I like these exercises that I have to say, stolen from everywhere, from theater games and from musicians and so forth, that they take you out of the thought process and directly into the perception process. So you're perceiving, but you're not structuring things. That is very important. It comes later. But at that moment of clicking, you know how, I know you've had this experience of looking at your work, whether it's files or film or whatever it is, and you come to something and it looks as though a stranger had borrowed your camera and walked up and said, may I have your camera? He goes, click, thank you, and gives it back. And you think, I couldn't have done that. And that's really one of the things that gets us going. Well, how can you get back to that? Because then you think, well, I have to train in this. I have to control this process. And you do. You do. But then you have to let it go again. And that's when the good work starts to happen.
So that's very interesting. The idea I think you're getting at is that when you take a really good picture, you tend to say, that was an accident.
Yes, yes. And it's not an accident. Because if they keep turning up on your files, it's not an accident. But it's just happening outside of your normal thought process of how am I going to get this done?
I see. And so you developed some exercises to help us get into that state where we're not going with an intention of taking a particular photograph, but rather going out and just experiencing the world. And you think that will help us to become more creative. Would that be?
I know it will, but you still go out with a project. You go out the door, you say, oh, I'm going to go to the beach, or maybe the rocks are nice. But you drop it as soon as something good happens. And you know what would be the great example? Ansel Adams driving by Hernandez, New Mexico. And Ansel is, the greatest techie of all time. And he sees this thing starting to happen on this church in this little village, and the light on the cross and the whole thing, and the moon is coming up. And he knows he has no time, and he just jumps out and he sets up his camera and barely frames it and click and gets it. And because he's Ansel, it's all just right, although there's really a lot of printing work that goes into that picture. But that's how he got moonrises. He set Ansel Adams and photography aside for that moment. There was no time.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. Can you give us an example of a time when you went out shooting and this happened to you?
Yes, yeah. Actually, when the ones that have really worked, the projects, the places that have yielded good photographs are places where that happened just constantly. So when I spent a lot of time in prisons in the South, and it just challenged. I had to get rid of me. I just had to just be there. Same thing with the little boxing club in Africa that I walked into, and things were happening so fast in a boxing club. You're flying. You can't say, "Can I do that again?" or "Can you do that again?" or anything. You just have to, ride the horse as best you can and hang on. But there was not a lot of Sean Kernan there, I have to say. I have to get that. The photographer you become can become kind of a weight sometimes.
Yes, I know what you mean. So, okay, so that happened to you. So you know what it feels like. Can you describe what it feels like so people maybe can relate their own experiences as a photographer to what you're talking about?
Yeah, I can. It's almost always uncomfortable. It's like being in a roller coaster and not liking it very much, not screaming, not having fun. Richard Serra, the sculptor who does those enormous steel things, he gave a talk near here recently. And he took questions, which was wonderful. And there were a lot of young art students there. And one of them said, how do you set aside your anxieties so you can go ahead and do your work? He said, you don't set them aside. You go right to them. If you're not anxious, it's because you haven't started yet. And he said, it's always, when it really gets going, you're out in front of your mind and your thoughts, and it's kind of scary, and you really feel it. So it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable. It only feels comfortable if you're kind of unaware of what's really happening behind you there.
So what kinds of things are you anxious about? That you're doing it wrong, that you're bothering people? What is it?
All of that. Am I bothering people? Am I doing it wrong? For sure. But sometimes wrong is just right. I had a friend who wrote a book about music called The Perfect Wrong Note. And he was trying to release people from the burdens of music and doing it right, sort of in the way that I am about photography. And I got an email from this guy the other day. He said, I looked at my pictures. I think they were a lot more interesting before I went to photography school.
Oh, absolutely. I can attest to that. So I went to grad school in photography, and as soon as I got there, I got really nervous because people they were looking at the photos and critiquing them and saying what was wrong with them. And I was sure that I was a complete fraud and they were going to find out. Right?
Yeah.
And everyone felt like that, of course. Now I talk to the people who were there with me then, and we all say the same thing and we start laughing, right? But everyone feels like that. Okay, so I have to ask you a question about something you wrote. You said in your book, and I hate to you can take it back if you don't still believe it, but you said when most of us photographers see something exciting, just the moment when we should be opening to it, we put a machine in front of our faces, right? So it sounds like you're saying that the camera almost gets in the way of this creative state. Is that what you think?
It can. And the trick is to not go there first. So we'll talk about some of the exercises, but the point of a lot of these exercises is not to do them right or to do them quickly, but to then recognize that you finally shut up and you were just listening, you were in awareness, you was paying attention to sounds and the wind and everything else, and then take up your camera. And then you're liable to get those other echoes, the things that make overtones and things that turn a note into a chord, which is really what you want.
Oh, I love that. That's really great.
Yeah.
Well, I am looking forward to showing us these exercises and giving us some examples. Before we do, I need to ask you about post-processing, because after all, this show is about Photoshop and Lightroom and fixing your photos. And
Yeah.
I am really curious as to how you see the things that you do after you take a photo as fitting into this creative workflow that I believe you're advocating. And it's okay if you don't like, you can be negative about it. It's okay.
No, I'm not going to be negative about it at all. A lot of what I do, I remember I sometimes would say to an East Coast audience, I'd say, this may seem a little bit California to you, if you know what I mean. But I said that in California once, and everybody just looked at me, kind of funny. But the other part of writing is clear language. Grammatical, clear, no extra stuff, bringing your points forward, making them, pulling other things back to support them and that kind of thing. And I think the analogy is very good with photography. The thing is that a writer gets to revise. Photographer doesn't get to revise, so they sort of have to revise and perhaps mine a little bit what goes on in their image. And now you can do so much to it, and if there's something there, then you can really realize it. If there's nothing there, then you make something kind of empty and everybody knows it.
No, that's true. That's true. But personally, I've had what I thought was a creative experience while working on photos, sitting in front of the computer. And I have friends who have, other photographer friends who have that, where it doesn't even feel like photography anymore. It feels like painting, or it feels like dancing. And the world goes away and you just making things.
Yes.
And for me, it was always like that. I don't think the taking of the picture was ever as wonderful for me as what came after. So,
really?
And I don't know if that's true for many other photographers. I think those who prefer to use technology to make a straight photograph look better are having a different experience than those of us who are just taking photographs as raw material and then doing things with them, making something else with them. It's not what I always do, but when I do it, I love the feeling.
No, I think that's what you're always doing. I mean, a writer sits down and hopes to God that something will take him over and he'll suddenly get an image in his mind. Well, the same thing will happen with a photographer, where things exceed what you had in mind and you have to get on them. And the same thing can happen in post, because that's one of the places that it does happen, one of the only places it can happen, because you can't go back and do it again.
Well, but you can if you do it right.
Well, but it's never there if you try and go find. If Ansel Adams said, it didn't come out right, and he drove back up the highway in New Mexico, it would be a cloudy day the next day. Wouldn't work.
So I'm very interested in seeing some of the exercises, if you don't mind sharing,
Sure.
that you think will help people to get to the state where they really can get a wonderful photograph in a different way than they may be used to going about it.
Okay. So this is one of those exercises, and it actually gangs with another one, and things happen very quickly, which I like. This is not something you have to struggle and learn. You're learning that you already know how to do it. So this is we give everybody a Chinese brush and 3 pieces of paper, and I tell them to put 3 marks on the paper that have no relation to each other, and then I tell them to put 3 marks on the paper that are like distant thunder, and then 3 marks that are like flute music, and 3 marks that are just about trouble, and so forth. And then we take them and we take several of them, this one, and we put them on the floor. And so here are all these things that people have done. And I look at them, and they have no content, basically. They're not about anything. But you look at them and you say, find me a picture of a difficult roommate. And they go to some jumbly picture. I say, find me a picture of a party you wish you hadn't gone to. And they find that. Find me a picture of somebody it would be great to take a cross-country trip with. And these things become perfectly clear. Find a picture of somebody who puts you to sleep every time they say anything. And so with no stuff, with no objects in the picture, it's almost like working with music. And I think there's a lot about photographic composition that works the way music works, which is some things come forward, things are loud, and you hear the music. It's like walking by that party, and you know what kind of party it is. So how you place things, neatly, messily, or messily on purpose. Okay, so that's a quick demonstration of something. And then we go to another assignment, which I also do on the first day.
I need to ask you, when you say the first day, you're talking about like a week-long workshop that you teach?
I'm talking about a week-long workshop. And so these things are things that you don't need to do in a week-long workshop. That's sort of been the trick of the book, is to find ways that people can work without 12 other people around. So the next thing requires a little cooperation from someone else, but you take your camera and you set your lens at a sort of a moderate telephoto, and you put it at the closest focusing distance that you can, or about a foot. And then you tape it there so you can't refocus. And then you tape it so you can't rezoom and change what you're seeing. And the assignment is to take 150 files, focusing with the camera to your eye, moving in and out, and your subject is a friend. And the subject, the thing you're looking for is light on the body. So people move in and out and try different things, and they want to refocus. They may look at the one that's on screen and say, God, it would be better if I had his mouth, or his whole mustache. But you can't do that. And if people do it, you know it right away, because it's always less interesting. It's always less interesting if people do that. So I think you mentioned something about this, but this makes you deal with what's there rather than what you think should be there. And you can only really deal with it by going into that state. I would never frame anything like this, but the woman was stuck in that space, and she didn't like it. She said, this is not working. This is a terrible assignment. I hate this assignment. She got this kind of fascinating picture.
It kind of looks like you have to get really close to your subject, and maybe that makes photographers uncomfortable.
Oh, I think it's one of the many things that makes photographers uncomfortable. You do have to get close, but once you do, thinking about it makes them uncomfortable. Doing it completely disappears. It's like people are made very anxious by the idea of doing a nude, but when they do it, it's no longer a naked person. It's just a bunch of lines and energy. It's like those 3 lines that we put down in ink. We're just moving the eye in the same way.
Oh, fantastic.
Now, and everybody looks at it and realizes they've never done a picture like this in a class or something, and that they're really interesting. And if you practice that or just allow it, it lets you give up a lot of control, knowing that your eye will put it together. Your eye will do it naturally, and it will put together something very interesting that leads to things like this. I would never frame a picture like that. It was shot in a boxing club in Africa, but it really was more about the energy and the movement and the compaction of the energy than if I'd backed up a little bit.
Fantastic. Now, you know what I'm thinking of, Sean? That I see a lot of photographs taken with smartphones. that remind me of these, where you have very little control, at least you didn't used to, the older smartphones, and there's very little thought goes in. You see this all the time. You see kids walking around, they raise their camera, one hand, boom, picture.
Yeah.
Now, they're not always this interesting. So why? Why aren't those as interesting, do you think?
Well, honestly, if you did this assignment, you'd look at a lot of stuff and you say, yeah, that's not that interesting, but look at that one. And I think they're not going for that one. They're still focused on the event. They still think that if I get something interesting in front of my camera, it'll be an interesting picture. And we know that's not true. But then when you take control back, this is a photograph by Norman Mauskopf, and it's all about that beautiful circle drifting around, and it's just a bunch of hats. It's not but if you think, well, I'm trying to get a cowboy here, I'm trying to get this rodeo, but it's the hats, it's the music of those hats sailing in a circle that really makes this one happen. And you kind of have to let go and see that way instead of seeing objects in front of your camera.
I see. Just take a picture. Don't take a picture of something.
And trust that you will arrange it. Something in you will arrange it. It's just the mind orders things, and if you let it go, and the same thing is true of acting. I've done a lot of acting exercises in my classes and worked with a lot of actors, and the best of them, Alan Arkin came into my class, and we did this wonderful series of exercises, and he said. What you have to do is get away from your idea about what things should look like, which is mostly learned by watching other actors, and just let whatever comes out will very likely be better than anything you had in mind.
That's an interesting point about watching other people. I see so many photographs on the internet that all look almost the same to me. Have you noticed?
I have, and it's a legitimate way to learn. I mean, when I started out, I had my Robert Frank period, and then I did portraits, and my idea of a good portrait was if it looked like Irving Penn maybe had taken it, on a bad day or something like that. And but then that fades away. It gets you to your own voice. I think it's a legitimate way to learn, but you have to know when to stop. But you have to have it in mind that you want to get beyond that, and that's what a lot of people don't have, I think.
So fantastic, and I think almost anybody could go out and do this exercise as you describe it. I can't remember again. What was it again? You tape your lens and do what?
Just up close, longish lens, close as you can get, and an accommodating friend who will window light, sunlight, anything, and then 150 frames, and don't refocus.
Great, I'm going to do it.
Okay, and the other thing that people sometimes do is they will back up but not refocus. So the whole thing goes out of focus. And that's fascinating too, because you're just dealing with shapes then. It's no longer my friend Ed. It's just shapes and light. And it works the same way. Like
that one of the neck that was out of focus. One of my favorites that you showed, So what else? So that's one exercise.
So that's one. Here's one that I love. This is something I do once again on the first day. These are some shots of a class out in Santa Fe. And this, you really do need other people to do it with you. But I can talk about it and you'll get it pretty quickly. So what you do is you get a group of people in silence, in kind of soft focus. They're not looking at each other or talking to each other. And I say, just mill around, and whenever you see a space between two people, walk through it. And when you get to the outside, turn around, walk back, same thing. So they're close, they're farther apart. Very important that they not talk and not laugh. Sometimes, as you can see, I've got 2 rubber balls here. Sometimes I bring that or cans of cat food or something and just have them start passing it silently between each other. So then people start to have to pay attention to somebody's going to hand them something. So you have to be paying that much more attention. But then the real kicker comes when I say, after about 5 minutes of this, I say, I'd like you to identify 2 other people. Don't let them know you're watching them, but know where they are at all times. So if they go behind you, just casually turn around and pick them up again and just know where they are always. So they work on that for about a minute. And then I say, I'd like you to form an equilateral triangle with those two other people. And there's a moment of silence, and then they start to laugh. Because every triangle is linked to two other triangles that are going on. So, and then they start to laugh, and then they try and do it. And sometimes people get very angry about it. Some people will say, stop moving and stop ruining everything. But within about 8 minutes, and it's never taken more than 10 minutes, within about 8 minutes, there are all these interlocking triangles and they're perfect. And they've done something that, when I said it, it sounded impossible. And and you can't solve it mentally. So they try that first and it doesn't work, but they solve it kinetically. And in 10 minutes, by setting aside your critical faculties, something else kicks in, takes care of everything, and there it is. So you've done something that, you know is impossible. You've done it in 10 minutes. But again, the main thing about it is the state that you get into while you're doing this. It's not about getting it done in 10 minutes or getting the triangles right. It's what you drop in order to do this. It's the same thing you drop in order to work with that close focusing assignment.
I see. So it's getting rid of your conscious awareness and letting some other force take over.
It's somebody called it perceiving without thinking. And when we see something, we walk down the street. We say, "What a!" You go, beautiful. The sun coming through. So you say, and then you say tree, and then you say light, and then you say beauty, and then you say maple, or is it a plane tree? And you sort of start categorizing, trying to find the shelf it goes on. But the more you can keep it up in the air, the longer you can keep it up in the air, the richer it gets. Eventually, it settles down itself. But we're so left-brained and so educated to our left brains that we go there first. And they're terrific. I want my brain surgeon to be very left-brained, but it doesn't do everything, and it doesn't do art very well.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You want to get to that place, and I can see that a whole week of doing this sort of thing could change the way you feel or the way you're reacting to the world around you.
Yeah. And actually, the people sometimes get confused by it. One guy said, I thought your exercises were about the stupidest thing I'd ever heard of. And then I looked at what people were doing with them. And it was just wonderful. And people come up after, 5 years later and say, I don't know what we did there, but my work looks better. And so I trusted. I really trusted.
That's great. Okay, what else?
Well, let's see.
You don't have to give away all your secrets, though, because people need to come.
I'll show you. Do you want to look at the book pictures? And this really worked this way the whole time. So this is a series that I call The Secret Books. And I just got an idea in my mind that you could do something with the theme of always a book. But what is a book? It's not information. It's not factual. It's really the energy that comes out of it. So for several years, I was walking around just thinking, what can I put on a book? And nothing much changed. It's always about the same position. The lighting was pretty much the same. But then these ideas would come into my head, and I'd try to find ways to do them. And this is all pre-Photoshop, by the way. So anything you see, and that, for example, was in front of the camera. It was just sitting right there in front of the camera.
Are these look like medium format or something?
They are good old Type 55 Polaroid in 4x5. A film I missed, and they're trying to make it again, but I don't know how far they're going to get. So, there was always, and again, things would just come out of that wonderful left field where all the good things come out of. Suddenly you'd say, I have an idea, and you go back and see if you could make it happen.
So that's very interesting because so this is the way I first heard of you, was by seeing this book. Mm-hmm. And I was completely blown away, not only because of the beauty of the photographs, because they made me think.
Yeah.
I guess we would call it in fancy art school conceptual, right? But great. It's not just a beautiful mountain. It's something that makes me think about what does it mean and gets me all excited. Plus
Yeah.
the fact I was at that point working on book art with my photographs.
Mm.
And so I was all interested. You hit me in like a million different ways. Love it, love it, love it. And one thing that struck me when I was thinking about when I was reading Looking for the Light, your current book with these exercises for creativity and awareness, is, well, that's interesting because the pictures from the secret books kind of are like kind of setups, right? Or constructions.
Yeah.
So that you had to be purposeful about them in some sense. So how do those two things jive?
Well, it's executing them was purposeful, and that's we walk on two legs. We have an idea strikes us from behind and knocks us over in the road. Then we get up and say, how can I do this? How can I make it clear? How can I be disciplined about it? I mean, I'm in my own work, I'm very disciplined. I really want great clarity and nothing but, and no confusion. But you have to have the first thing, you have to have that out of nowhere perception. That's where it has to begin. And you called it conceptual. It's not really, in the sense that it wasn't done to a plan. There was a plan, but one day I thought, ants. I wonder if ants look like pipe.
I didn't even know what it was.
So I got some ants from North Carolina, from a little place that supplies ants. And, in this case, my friends were bringing me dead birds. I was like it's like the cat dragged them in. Found this book. Thought, what can I do to that? And realized I really didn't have to do anything with it. But the greatest thing, the thing that most excited me about this, we did this as a book and with texts by the great Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges. And a couple of years ago, and this was, he had passed away at the time, so it was not me and Jorge working on this. And somebody said, it was well known that he was blind, and somebody said, "Do you think he would have liked your pictures?" I said, "He was blind." But a couple of years ago, I got a phone call from Penguin UK, and they were bringing out 8 of his books, and they wanted to use my photos on the cover.
Yeah.
And there they are. So I snuck into world literature through the servants' entrance, but I'm very happy.
So where do people find Looking for the Light? Where do they find the secret books?
The best place to start, probably, Secret Books is on Amazon. Looking into the Light, best place to start is on my site. And there's a link to it from there and all kinds of other words. There's also a website called lookingintothelight.com, which, and what we did, in order to get some sort of sense of community going, I set up a series of galleries where people can send in their own response to the assignments, and we post them and that kind of thing. So that's what I want the site to be.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's going to get a lot of activity, I'm sure.
Good.
Very exciting. And your website is what?
SeanKernan.com.
Okay, that's great. We'll put a little, we'll post it on there so everybody can get to the site. Yeah.
Good.
Flash it on there. Now, what else are you doing? What are you working on now?
I've been seduced into working with video, and I did a little video in this boxing club in Kampala, which is sort of another universe, which is what I love to do, is get into a place where nothing that I know does me any good. And then I was invited to the Crow Indian Reservation in Montana, and I've made 4 trips there now. Just most recently was out there, just not trying to do a reportage on life on the reservation, but what it feels like to be there, just what it feels like. The woman, when I arrived, the woman I was working with said, "So what do you want to say about us?" And I said, "I don't want to say anything. I want to listen." And that's what the whole thing. I want you to be sort of a silent spectator walking around the reservation. It's, again, another universe.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, what about workshops? Are you going to be doing these creativity workshops again? And
I've that's the only. I do other kinds of workshops, but basically they're all this anyway. I actually started to do a portrait workshop. Did that in the main photo workshop, but not how to do portraits right, but how to really do something deeper than just getting the lighting right and so forth. and then this creativity thing, which is it's so much fun. It's almost more fun than taking pictures.
It's all fun. Can you believe that this is our jobs?
I know.
All this stuff is so great. Well, anyway, it's been a great pleasure to talk with you. I am just excited to look further into your books. I'm honored to get to meet you in person. And thank you so much for being with us.
This is sort of in person. I mean, it's at a slight distance.
Yeah, it's better than the phone. All right, then. Good night, Sean.
All right. If you find any typos, let me know.
What a treat it was to talk with Master Sean Kernan about creativity. He really knows what he's talking about. He's been teaching creativity and developing his creativity exercises for photographers and other creative professionals for over 30 years. He's taught at places like the International Center for Photography, the New School, and the Santa Fe and Maine photo workshops. So it was really an honor to talk with him.